Sarah Martinez looked like any other soccer mom picking up groceries on a Tuesday evening. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore worn jeans and sneakers that had seen better days. The checkout line at the corner store moved slowly, and she checked her phone for the third time, knowing her 8-year-old daughter Emma was waiting for her at soccer practice. What the three men who had been watching her for the past 20 minutes didn't know was that beneath her ordinary appearance lay something extraordinary. They saw an easy target, a woman alone, distracted by her phone, carrying a purse that looked expensive enough to make their night worthwhile. They had no idea they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. Because Sarah Martinez wasn't just a soccer mom. She was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, a decorated Navy SEAL who had completed 8 combat deployments and earned commendations that most military personnel only dream about. She had survived situations that would break most people, and she had skills that could turn deadly in seconds. The three men were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you least expect. And when they pressed that gun to her head, they would discover why you should never, ever threaten a Navy SEAL, even one who's just trying to buy milk for her daughter's cereal. Sarah Martinez had been out of active duty for 3 years, but some habits never died. Even while standing in line at Murphy's Corner store, her eyes automatically scanned the environment. 2 exits, front door, and emergency exit near the back. For customers besides herself, one elderly man reading a newspaper by the magazine rack, a teenage girl texting near the candy aisle, and a young couple arguing quietly about which brand of chips to buy. The store clerk, a kid who couldn't be older than 19, was more interested in his phone than the security camera monitor that showed the parking lot. She noticed the black sedan that had been following her since she left the soccer field. At first, she thought it was coincidence. After all, this was suburbia. Lots of people drove similar cars and took similar routes. But when the same car made 3 turns with her, including one that required getting into a turn-only lane, her training kicked in. Someone was tracking her movements. Sarah had learned to trust her instincts during her time with SEAL Team 7. In Kandahar, those instincts had kept her alive when an IED destroyed the Humvee she would have been riding in if she hadn't felt something was wrong. In Somalia, they had warned her about an ambush that saved her entire squad. Now, in a grocery store in suburban Denver, those same instincts were screaming that trouble was coming. She had transitioned to civilian life 3 years ago after Emma was born. Her husband, Mike, also former military, had been supportive when she decided to leave active duty. Emma needs at least one parent who isn't deployed half the year, she had told him. It was the right decision, but sometimes Sarah missed the clarity of military life. In combat, threats were obvious. Enemies wore different uniforms or carried different weapons. In civilian life, danger often came disguised as normalcy. The 3 men who entered the store looked normal enough. The first was tall and thin, wearing a Denver Broncos cap pulled low over his eyes. The second was shorter and stockier, with tattoos covering both arms. The third looked nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder and fidgeting with something in his jacket pocket. They split up immediately upon entering. One went to the beer section, one browsed the snacks, and the nervous one positioned himself near the front door. Sarah's military training had taught her to read people and situations. These 3 weren't shopping. They were positioning themselves for something. The way they moved, the way they avoided eye contact with the security camera, the way the nervous one kept checking his watch. It all pointed to one thing. This was about to become a robbery. The smart move would be to leave immediately. Sarah could walk out right now, get in her car, and drive away. She could call the police from a safe distance and let them handle it. That's what any reasonable person would do. But as she started to move toward the exit, she saw something that changed everything. The elderly man by the magazine rack wasn't just any elderly man. He was wearing a Vietnam veteran cap, and Sarah could see the slight tremor in his hands that suggested Parkinson's disease. The teenage girl was actually younger than Sarah had first thought, maybe 14 or 15, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was here without her parents' knowledge. The young couple had stopped arguing and were now holding hands, the woman showing the man something on her phone that made him smile. These were innocent people who had no idea what was about to happen. They had no training, no experience with violence, no way to protect themselves. And Sarah couldn't just walk away and leave them to whatever these three men had planned. She made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. Instead of leaving, she moved deeper into the store, positioning herself where she could see all three men while appearing to browse the shelves. She picked up a can of soup and pretended to read the nutrition label while her mind shifted into the tactical mode she knew so well. The stocky man with tattoos was carrying a concealed weapon. She could tell by the way he favored his right side and how his jacket hung unevenly. The tall one in the Broncos cap had something in his back pocket that created a rectangular bulge, probably zip ties or duct tape. The nervous one by the door was definitely armed. She could see the outline of a pistol in his jacket pocket every time he moved his arm. This wasn't just a robbery. The zip ties suggested they were planning to restrain people, which meant they intended to take their time. That made this infinitely more dangerous for everyone involved. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "How's the grocery run? Emma's asking when you'll be home." For a moment, she thought about her daughter waiting at soccer practice, probably wondering why her mom was late. Emma had been through enough disruption in her young life. Sarah's deployments had meant months of video calls and missed bedtime stories. The transition to civilian life was supposed to give Emma stability, normalcy, a mom who came home every night. But normalcy was about to be shattered, and Sarah was the only person in this store who might be able to prevent it. The three men were getting into position. The tall one had moved closer to the counter, the stocky one was blocking the back exit, and the nervous one remained by the front door. They were about to make their move, and when they did, every person in this store would become a victim, unless someone stopped them. Sarah set down the can of soup and took a deep breath. She had promised herself when she left the military that she was done with violence, done with combat, done with putting her life on the line. She was going to be a normal mom, living a normal life. But sometimes normal life requires extraordinary action. She reached for her phone and quickly typed a text to Mike. "Might be a few minutes late. Tell Emma I love her." She didn't hit send yet. There might not be time later. The tall man in the Broncos cap pulled his weapon just as the teenage girl approached the counter to pay for her candy. The store clerk looked up from his phone just in time to see the barrel of the gun pointed at his face. "Nobody move," the man shouted. "This is a robbery. Everyone get on the ground now." The elderly veteran dropped his newspaper and raised his shaking hands. The teenage girl screamed. The young couple grabbed each other in terror. The store clerk's face went white as he raised his hands above his head. But Sarah Martinez didn't get on the ground. Instead, she did something that none of the three robbers expected. She stepped forward into the open where all three men could see her clearly. "Gentlemen," she said in a calm, steady voice that carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat, "I think you should reconsider your plans." The tall man swung his gun toward her, his eyes wide with surprise and anger. "Lady, are you crazy? I said get on the ground." Sarah looked directly into his eyes, her expression completely calm. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs. And you have about 5 seconds to put that weapon down before I take it away from you." The three men looked at each other in confusion. The stocky one laughed nervously. "This chick thinks she's some kind of soldier or something." "Not some kind of soldier," Sarah said, taking another step forward. "I've been in combat in 8 different countries. I've eliminated targets from distances you couldn't imagine. I've survived things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. And right now, you're threatening innocent people in my neighborhood." The nervous one by the door was starting to shake. "Tommy, maybe we should just leave. This is getting weird." But the tall man, Tommy, was either too committed or too stupid to back down. "Lady, I don't care if you think you're G.I. Jane. You're about to learn what happens when you don't do what you're told." He moved towards Sarah, his gun aimed at her head. The other customers were frozen in terror, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The store clerk had ducked behind the counter, probably calling 911, but The police would be at least 5 minutes away. A lot could happen in 5 minutes. Tommy pressed the barrel of the gun against Sarah's temple, so close she could smell the gun oil and feel the cold metal against her skin. Now get on the ground like I told you, or I'm going to blow your brains all over this store. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw exactly what she had expected to see, a man who had probably never been in a real fight, who thought a gun made him powerful, who had no idea what he was dealing with. She had seen the same look in the eyes of insurgents who thought they could intimidate American forces. They learned quickly how wrong they were. "You've made a mistake," she said quietly, her voice so calm it was almost eerie. A very big mistake. What happened next took exactly 3 seconds, though to everyone watching, it seemed to occur in slow motion. Sarah's hand moved faster than the human eye could follow, using a disarming technique she had practiced thousands of times in training and used in real combat situations. Her left hand trapped Tommy's gun hand against her head, while her right hand struck his wrist with surgical precision, hitting the exact pressure point that would cause his fingers to release involuntarily. The gun fell to the floor as Tommy's hand went numb. Before Tommy could react, Sarah's elbow drove into his solar plexus, doubling him over and driving all the air from his lungs. As he gasped for breath, she spun him around and applied a sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to his brain. In military parlance, it was called a blood choke, and when applied correctly, it rendered someone unconscious in seconds without causing permanent damage. Tommy dropped to the floor, unconscious but breathing. The stocky man with tattoos was reaching for his weapon when Sarah called out, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." She had picked up Tommy's gun and was holding it with the kind of casual confidence that comes from years of weapons training. Her stance was perfect, her grip steady, her aim unwavering. Your friend there will wake up in a few minutes with nothing more than a headache. Whether you join him or walk out of here depends entirely on your next decision. The nervous man by the door had already made his choice. He bolted through the front entrance and disappeared into the parking lot, abandoning his partners without a second thought. The stocky man looked at his unconscious partner, then at Sarah, then at the gun in her hands. "This ain't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied. "You have 10 seconds to pick up your friend and leave before the police arrive. If I ever see you in this neighborhood again, you won't get a warning." The man grabbed Tommy under the arms and dragged him toward the door, struggling with the dead weight. As they reached the exit, Sarah called out one more time, "And gentlemen, the next time you want to rob someone, you might want to choose a different neighborhood. This one has a soccer mom problem." As soon as they were gone, Sarah set the gun on the counter and turned to check on the other customers. The elderly veteran was sitting on the floor, his hands still shaking, but his eyes bright with admiration. The teenage girl was crying, but unhurt. The young couple was holding each other tightly, still processing what they had witnessed. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah asked, her voice returning to the gentle tone of a concerned mother. The store clerk emerged from behind the counter, his face pale but grateful. "Lady, I don't know who you are, but you just saved all our lives." Sarah's phone buzzed with another text from Mike. "Emma's coach is asking where you are. Everything okay?" She finally hit send on the message she had typed earlier, then added, "Everything's fine. On my way home now." But as she drove toward the soccer field to pick up Emma, Sarah knew that everything wasn't fine. For 3 years, she had tried to leave her military life behind, to become just another suburban mom. But tonight had proven that some things can't be left behind. Some skills never fade. Some instincts never disappear. And sometimes being a soccer mom means being ready to be something more when innocent people need protection. The black sedan was no longer following her. Word would spread quickly in certain circles about what had happened at Murphy's Corner store tonight. About the soccer mom who turned out to be something else entirely. Sarah pulled into the soccer field parking lot and saw Emma waiting by the fence, her cleats muddy and her face bright with excitement about the practice she had just finished. For a moment, the two sides of Sarah's life collided, the warrior and the mother, the protector and the nurturer. "Mom, You're late, Emma called out, running toward the car. Sorry, sweetheart, Sarah said, helping Emma load her soccer bag into the trunk. I had to stop at the store, and it took a little longer than expected. Did you get my favorite cereal? Sarah realized she had never actually bought anything at the store. In all the excitement, she had forgotten why she went there in the first place. We'll have to stop somewhere else on the way home. As they drove to another store, one where Sarah was certain no one would try to rob anyone that night, Emma chattered about soccer practice and homework and a boy in her class who was annoying but kind of funny. Sarah listened and responded in all the right places, but part of her mind was still processing what had happened. For 3 years, she had been trying to figure out how to be a normal mom. Tonight, she had learned something important. She didn't need to choose between being a protector and being a mother. Sometimes, being the best mother means being willing to be the protector too. When they got home, Mike was waiting in the kitchen, and Sarah could see in his eyes that he knew something had happened. After 12 years of marriage to a military woman, he could read the signs. Interesting trip to the store? He asked quietly while Emma was upstairs changing out of her soccer uniform. You could say that, Sarah replied. 3 guys decided to rob Murphy's corner store while I was there. Mike raised his eyebrows. Decided. Past tense, Sarah said. They changed their minds. Mike nodded slowly. He had been a Marine before he became a high school teacher, and he understood the language she was speaking. Everyone okay? Everyone's fine. The police probably have some questions, but I gave the store clerk my information. I'll deal with it tomorrow. That night, after Emma was asleep and the dishes were done, Sarah and Mike sat on their back porch looking up at the stars. It was the same ritual they had followed throughout their marriage, a quiet time to decompose from the day and reconnect with each other. Do you miss it? Mike asked. The action, the adrenaline, the sense of purpose? Sarah thought about the question for a long time before answering. I thought I did, she said finally. I thought civilian life meant giving up everything that made me who I am. But tonight I realized something different. What's that? I'm not former military. I'm military living a civilian life. There's a difference. Tonight, when those people needed someone to protect them, I was exactly who I was supposed to be. Not in spite of being a mom, but because of it. Mike reached over and took her hand. You know there's going to be fallout from this. Word gets around. Sarah nodded. I know, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe this neighborhood needs to know that if someone threatens the people who live here, they're going to have a problem. Just promise me you'll be careful. Emma needs her mom to come home safe every night. I promise, Sarah said. But I also promise that if someone threatens our family, our neighbors, or innocent people in our community, they're going to learn the same lesson those 3 men learned tonight. What lesson is that? Sarah smiled, the same smile she had worn when she received her Navy Cross for valor in combat. That you should never threaten a Navy SEAL, even one who's just trying to buy milk for her daughter's cereal. The news van arrived at Sarah's house 3 days after the incident at Murphy's corner store. She was in the backyard helping Emma practice soccer drills when she heard the commotion out front, car doors slamming, voices, and the telltale sound of camera equipment being set up. Mike appeared at the back door with a grim expression on his face. Channel 7 News, he said. They want to interview the hero soccer mom who stopped an armed robbery. Sarah sighed and set down the soccer ball. She had been dreading this moment since Detective Rodriguez had left their house the previous morning after taking her statement. The detective had been professional and understanding, but Sarah could see the wheels turning in his head. This wasn't going to stay quiet. Emma, go inside and start your homework, Sarah said. Dad, and I need to handle something. Is this about what happened at the store? Emma asked. Katie's mom told her that you beat up some bad guys. Sarah and Mike exchanged glances. They had told Emma a simplified version of events, that some men had tried to rob the store and that Mom had helped stop them. But in a small community like theirs, word traveled fast, and details had a way of growing with each retelling. Just go inside, sweetheart, Sarah said gently. We'll talk more later. The reporter was a well-dressed woman in her 30s with perfectly styled hair and an eager expression that Sarah recognized from her media training during her military service. This was someone looking for a story that would boost ratings not necessarily someone interested in the truth. Mrs. Martinez? I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. Could we have a few minutes of your time to talk about what happened at Murphy's Corner Store? Sarah remained on her front porch, not inviting them into her yard. I gave a statement to the police. That's all I have to say about it. Our sources tell us you're former military, the reporter pressed. Navy SEALs, specifically. Is that correct? Sarah felt her jaw tighten. Who told you that? We can't reveal our sources, but we understand you used your military training to subdue 3 armed robbers. Our viewers would love to hear about your heroic actions. There was nothing heroic about it, Sarah said firmly. Some people were in danger, and I helped. That's all. But Jennifer Walsh wasn't backing down. Mrs. Martinez, you're being modest. According to witnesses, you disarmed a man who had a gun pressed to your head. You rendered him unconscious using what appeared to be military combat techniques. You then held his partners at gunpoint until they fled. That's not something an ordinary citizen could do. Sarah could see Mike tensing behind her. They had both hoped this would blow over quietly, but it was clear that wasn't going to happen. The reporter had done her homework, and she wasn't going to be satisfied with a simple no comment. I did what anyone would do to protect innocent people, Sarah said. Now I need to ask you to leave my property. Mrs. Martinez, our research shows you served 8 tours of duty with SEAL Team 7. You received multiple commendations, including the Navy Cross for actions in Somalia. You've been trained in close-quarters combat, weapons handling, and tactical operations. When you left the military 3 years ago, you brought those skills into civilian life. Don't the people of this community have a right to know they're living next to someone with your background? That last question crossed a line, and Sarah felt her military bearing take over. She stepped forward, and her voice took on the tone she had used when commanding troops in combat zones. Let me be very clear about something, she said, looking directly into the camera. My military service is a matter of public record, and I'm proud of it. I serve my country with honor, and I transitioned to civilian life to raise my daughter in a safe, peaceful community. What happened at that store was not about my military background. It was about a mother protecting other people's children, other people's parents, other people's families. Any one of you would have done the same thing if you had the ability. But most people don't have the ability, Jennifer Walsh countered. Most people couldn't disarm a gunman and render him unconscious in 3 seconds. That's what makes this newsworthy. Sarah realized she was fighting a losing battle. The story was going to run whether she cooperated or not, and it would probably be more accurate if she participated than if she didn't. She made a quick decision. 5 minutes, she said. You get 5 minutes, and then you leave my family alone. The interview was uncomfortable, but not as bad as Sarah had feared. She kept her answers short and focused on the safety of the community rather than her military background. She emphasized that she was a mother first and that her actions were motivated by the need to protect innocent people, not by any desire for attention or recognition. When it was over, Jennifer Walsh thanked her and promised the story would air that evening. As the news crew packed up their equipment, Sarah noticed several neighbors had come out to watch from their yards. Some waved supportively, but others seemed uncomfortable, as if they were seeing her differently now. Mrs. Chun from next door approached as the news van pulled away. She was an elderly woman who had always been friendly, but reserved, someone who kept to herself and minded her own business. Sarah, dear, she said, I had no idea about your background. I feel terrible that I never thanked you properly for all your service to our country. There's nothing to thank me for, Sarah replied. I was just doing my job, same as anyone else. But now I understand why Emma is so well-behaved and confident, Mrs. Chun continued. She has a mother who taught her that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, no matter how scary they seem. That evening, the whole family gathered in the living room to watch the news story. Sarah had prepared Emma for what she might see, but it was still strange watching herself on television, being described as a hero soccer mom and a decorated Navy SEAL living quietly in suburbia. The story included interviews with some of the people who had been in the store that night. The elderly veteran, whose name was Frank Morrison, had nothing but praise for Sarah's actions. "I've seen combat," he said into the camera. "I know what real courage looks like. What that young woman did in that store, that was courage. She put herself at risk to protect strangers. That's the definition of heroism." The teenage girl, identified only as Ashley, was more emotional. "I was so scared," she said, tears in her eyes. "I thought those men were going to hurt us." But then she stepped forward and just took control. "She made me feel safe when I thought I was going to die." Even the store clerk, a kid named Marcus who was working his way through community college, had positive things to say. "Mrs. Martinez saved our lives, no doubt about it. Those guys weren't just planning to rob us. They had zip ties and duct tape. They were going to hurt people. If she hadn't been there." But the story also included a segment about the potential dangers of having former military personnel in civilian communities. A criminologist from a university talked about PTSD, about the difficulties veterans face in transitioning to civilian life, and about the risks of applying military solutions to civilian problems. While Mrs. Martinez's actions may have been well-intentioned, the experts said, we need to consider whether encouraging this kind of vigilante response is healthy for our communities. What happens when someone with military training makes a mistake? What happens when the perceived threat isn't real? Emma watched the entire story with wide eyes, occasionally looking at her mother with a mixture of pride and confusion. When it was over, she had questions. "Mom, are you famous now?" "No, sweetheart. I just did what needed to be done, and some people made a big deal about it. The man on TV said you might have PTSD. What's that?" Sarah sighed. This was a conversation she had hoped to postpone for several more years. PTSD is something that can happen to people who have been through scary or traumatic experiences. Some veterans develop it after coming home from war. It can make it hard for them to readjust to normal life. "Do you have it?" "No, Emma. I was very lucky. I had good support from my fellow soldiers and from Dad, and I've been able to transition to civilian life successfully. But what if you did have it? Would you still be my mom?" Sarah felt her heart clench. "Of course I would still be your mom. Having PTSD doesn't make someone a bad person. It just means they need help and support." Mike jumped in to help redirect the conversation. "The important thing is that your mom helped protect innocent people. She used her training and experience to make sure everyone went home safely to their families. Like the old man who was reading the newspaper. Exactly like that. He went home to his family because your mom was brave enough to help when he needed it." Emma seemed satisfied with that explanation, but Sarah could see the wheels turning in her daughter's mind. This was going to change how Emma saw her, how she understood what her mother was capable of. For 8 years, Emma had known Sarah simply as Mom, the person who made breakfast, helped with homework, and cheered at soccer games. Now, she was learning that her mom was someone who could fight and win against dangerous people. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah and Mike had a longer conversation about what the news story might mean for their family. "The phone's been ringing all evening," Mike said. "I'll let most of them go to voicemail, but I listened to a few. Some are supportive, people saying they're glad to have someone like you in the neighborhood. Others are less positive." "What kind of less positive?" "Concerned parents asking if their children are safe playing with Emma. Someone from the Homeowners Association asking if we disclosed your military background when we moved in. A few calls that were just hostile. People saying they don't want killers living in their neighborhood." Sarah had expected this kind of reaction, but it still hurt. For 3 years, she had worked hard to be just another member of the community. She had volunteered at Emma's school, participated in neighborhood barbecues, and built friendships with other parents. Now, some of those same people were questioning whether she belonged. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that my wife is a decorated veteran who served her country with honor, and that anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." Sarah smiled despite her frustration. This was why she had married Mike. He had her back no matter what. "There's something else," Mike continued. "Detective Rodriguez called. He said there might be some complications with the case." "What kind of complications?" "The 3 men from the store. Apparently they're not just random criminals. Rodriguez thinks they might be connected to a larger criminal organization. When you humiliated them in public, you might have created a bigger problem. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. In her military career, she had learned that criminals, like enemy combatants, didn't like to be embarrassed. When someone made them look weak or incompetent, they often felt compelled to restore their reputation through retaliation. What does Rodriguez think I should do? He suggested varying your routine, being more aware of your surroundings, and considering whether Emma's school needs to be informed about potential risks. The idea that her actions might have put Emma in danger was almost unbearable. Sarah had spent 8 years in combat zones, but the thought of her daughter being threatened because of something she had done was worse than any fear she had experienced in military service. Maybe I should have just called 911 and stayed out of it, she said. Mike shook his head firmly. Don't second-guess yourself. You saw innocent people in danger, and you acted to protect them. That's who you are, Sarah. It's why I fell in love with you, and it's why Emma is going to grow up knowing that good people stand up to bad people. But if something happens to Emma because of this, nothing is going to happen to Emma. We're going to be smart about security, we're going to take reasonable precautions, and we're going to live our lives. We're not going to let fear control us. Sarah knew Mike was right, but the conversation had raised questions she wasn't sure how to answer. How do you balance being a protector with being a mother? How do you use your skills to help others without putting your own family at risk? How do you integrate a warrior's training with a civilian's responsibilities? The next morning brought more complications. As Sarah was dropping Emma off at school, several other parents approached her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Some wanted to thank her for her service. Others had questions about her background that felt more like interrogations than conversations. Linda Patterson, whose daughter was in Emma's class, was direct in her concerns. Sarah, I have to ask, do you keep weapons in your house? I'm not comfortable with Madison playing at your house if there are guns around. My husband and I are both trained in firearm safety, Sarah replied carefully. Any weapons in our home are properly secured and stored according to all local and federal regulations. But you do have weapons? Sarah felt her patience wearing thin. Linda, yesterday you were comfortable with your daughter playing at our house. The only thing that's changed is that now you know I'm trained to protect her if something bad happens. That should make you feel more safe, not less. But Linda wasn't convinced, and Sarah could see the doubt in her eyes. This was going to be an ongoing problem. People who had seen her as just another mom now saw her as something potentially dangerous. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled Sarah aside after the other parents had left. Mrs. Martinez, I wanted you to know that I think what you did was incredibly brave. My husband is a police officer, and he says what you did probably saved lives. Thank you, but I just did what anyone would do. No, Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. That's not true, and you know it. Most people would have been too scared to act. Emma is lucky to have a mother who knows how to stand up to bullies. I'm worried about how this might affect Emma at school. Are the other kids saying anything? Actually, Emma seems to be handling it very well. Yesterday, when Jason Martinez, no relation, was bullying Sarah Kim about her lunch, Emma told him that bullies are just scared people who try to make others scared too. She said her mom taught her that sometimes you have to stand up to scared people to protect people who can't protect themselves. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. She was glad Emma was learning to stand up for others, but she didn't want her daughter to think violence was always the answer to problems. I hope she's not encouraging other kids to fight. Oh no, nothing like that. She's actually been more protective of the younger kids and more helpful when conflicts arise. It's like knowing her mom is strong has made her feel more confident about being kind. That afternoon, Sarah was working in her garden when a car she didn't recognize pulled into her driveway. 2 men in suits got out, and Sarah immediately felt her situational awareness kick into high gear. She recognized the bearing and the way they moved. These were either law enforcement or military. Mrs. Martinez, the older of the 2 men, called out, I'm Agent Thompson from the FBI, and this is Agent Martinez. Could we have a word with you? Sarah wiped the dirt from her hands and walked toward them. maintaining a distance that would allow her to react if necessary. What can I do for you? We'd like to talk to you about the incident at Murphy's Corner Store. Specifically, about the 3 men you encountered there. I already gave a statement to the local police. Yes, we've seen that statement. We're here because those 3 men are persons of interest in a federal investigation. When you intervened in that robbery, you may have disrupted something much larger than a simple convenience store holdup. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What kind of investigation? The men you encountered, Tommy Kellerman, Marcus Webb, and Peter Santos, are known associates of a criminal organization that's been under federal surveillance for several months. We believe they were using that store robbery as a test run for something bigger. Agent Martinez, the younger of the two, spoke up. Mrs. Martinez, we understand you neutralized Kellerman and forced the other 2 to flee. Can you tell us exactly what happened during those few seconds when you disarmed him? Sarah recounted the incident once again, focusing on the specific techniques she had used and the reactions of the 3 men. The agents listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification about timing or positioning. Mrs. Martinez, Agent Thompson said when she was finished, we believe your actions may have prevented something much worse than a store robbery. These men weren't just looking for quick cash. They were practicing crowd control and intimidation techniques that would be useful in larger operations. What kind of larger operations? We can't get into specifics, but let's say they had targets that would have resulted in much more significant casualties than what you prevented at the store. Sarah felt a chill run through her. Are you saying my family is in danger? We're saying that you disrupted their plans in a very public way, and criminals like this don't appreciate that kind of interference. We'd like to offer you and your family some protective measures while we conclude our investigation. What kind of protective measures? Increased patrol presence in your neighborhood, secure communication protocols, and some basic security upgrades to your home. Nothing too invasive, but enough to ensure your family's safety. Sarah thought about Emma, about Mike, about the normal life they had built together. How long are we talking about? A few weeks, maybe a month. These things tend to resolve themselves quickly once we make arrests. And if I say no? Agent Thompson's expression was serious. Mrs. Martinez, you've already proven you can take care of yourself. But your family doesn't have your training, and these are dangerous people who don't follow rules of engagement. I strongly recommend you accept our offer. That evening, Sarah and Mike had another difficult conversation. The news that her actions had disrupted a federal investigation changed everything. This wasn't just about local criminals anymore. This was about organized crime and federal law enforcement. What do you think we should do? Mike asked. I think we don't have a choice, Sarah replied. If there's even a small chance that Emma could be in danger because of something I did, we have to take precautions. But how do we explain this to her? How do we tell an 8-year-old that the FBI is watching our house because her mom stopped a robbery? We tell her that sometimes when good people do good things, it makes bad people angry. And when bad people get angry, other good people, like the FBI, help protect us until the bad people are caught. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, Mike. I saw people in danger, and I acted to protect them. Now other people are acting to protect us. It's the same principle on a larger scale. But as Sarah lay in bed that night, listening to Mike's steady breathing and the sound of Emma's music playing softly down the hall, she knew it wasn't really that simple. Every choice had consequences, and sometimes those consequences rippled out in ways you couldn't predict or control. She had spent 3 years trying to leave her military life behind, trying to become just another suburban mom. But maybe that had been the wrong goal all along. Maybe the point wasn't to stop being a warrior. Maybe the point was to learn how to be a warrior in a different kind of war, fighting different kinds of battles, protecting different kinds of objectives. Tomorrow she would call Agent Thompson and accept the FBI's offer of protection. She would explain to Emma why there would be more police cars in their neighborhood for the next few weeks. She would deal with the judgment and curiosity of neighbors who were still processing the revelation that the soccer mom next door was someone they had never really known. But tonight, she was simply a mother lying in bed, listening to the sounds of her family sleeping safely under the same roof, grateful for the skills that allowed her to protect the people who mattered most to her. Outside, a dark sedan drove slowly past the house, its occupants noting the new security features that had been installed that afternoon. In the morning, Agent Thompson would review the surveillance footage and add another entry to a file that was growing thicker each day. The consequences of Sarah's actions at Murphy's Corner store were just beginning to unfold, and the quiet suburban life she had tried to build was about to face its greatest test yet. 3 weeks after the FBI agents first appeared at her door, Sarah was sitting in Emma's school parking lot waiting for soccer practice to end when Agent Thompson called with news that would change everything. "Mrs. Martinez, we've made arrests in the case. Tommy Kellerman, Marcus Webb, and Peter Santos are all in federal custody, along with 7 other members of their organization." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. What were they planning? A coordinated attack on 3 different locations during the upcoming Heritage Festival downtown. Based on the materials we recovered, we estimate they could have killed or injured dozens of people. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Heritage Festival was one of Denver's biggest community events, attended by thousands of families with children. Emma had been looking forward to it for weeks. "Agent Thompson, are you telling me that stopping that convenience store robbery prevented a terrorist attack?" "I'm telling you that your actions disrupted their operational timeline and forced them to accelerate their plans before they were fully prepared. When they tried to acquire additional weapons and explosives ahead of schedule, they made mistakes that allowed us to identify and track them." Sarah sat in stunned silence for a moment, watching through the windshield as Emma practiced penalty kicks with her teammates. The normalcy of the scene, children playing soccer, parents chatting on the sidelines, coaches offering encouragement, felt surreal against the backdrop of what Agent Thompson was telling her. "So, it's over? It's over. You and your family are safe. The federal protection will be withdrawn tonight, and you can return to your normal routine." Normal routine. Sarah almost laughed at the phrase. Nothing about the past 3 weeks had been normal, and she suspected nothing would ever be quite the same again. The security measures the FBI had implemented had been subtle but comprehensive. Unmarked cars patrolling the neighborhood, enhanced security systems at the house, and a direct line to federal agents who could respond within minutes if needed. Sarah had tried to maintain normalcy for Emma's sake, but it had been impossible to completely hide the fact that their lives were under scrutiny. Emma had handled it better than Sarah had expected. When asked why there were more police cars in the neighborhood, Emma had simply said, "Mom helped catch some bad guys, so the good guys are making sure the bad guys' friends don't try to get revenge." Her 8-year-old logic had been remarkably accurate, but the past 3 weeks had also brought unexpected developments. The news story about Sarah's military background had spread beyond Denver, picked up by national media outlets and military blogs. She had received dozens of emails and letters from fellow veterans, from people who had been helped by military personnel, and from civilians who wanted to express their gratitude for her service. More surprisingly, she had received several job offers. A private security firm in Colorado Springs wanted to hire her as a trainer and consultant. A self-defense instructor in Boulder had offered to partner with her in starting classes for women. Even the Denver Police Department had reached out about a position in their community outreach program. Sarah had turned them all down, but they had forced her to think about questions she had been avoiding. What was she supposed to do with her skills and experience now that Emma was older and more independent? How could she contribute to her community in ways that honored both her military background and her role as a mother? As soccer practice ended and Emma came running toward the car, dirty and exhausted but glowing with the satisfaction that comes from physical exertion, Sarah made a decision that had been building for weeks. "How was practice, sweetheart?" "Great. Coach says I'm getting better at defending. She says the best defense is when you're strong enough and smart enough that the other team doesn't want to mess with you." Sarah smiled. Even Emma's soccer coach was inadvertently reinforcing military principles. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Sarah and Mike sat on their back porch for what had become their regular debriefing session. The FBI surveillance equipment was gone, the extra patrol cars had moved on to other assignments, and their neighborhood looked the way it had 3 weeks ago. But everything felt different. "Agent Thompson called," Sarah said. "It's over. They arrested everyone involved, and we're no longer under protection." Mike let out a long breath. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved, grateful, and—" Sarah paused, searching for the right word. "Purposeful. Purposeful. Mike, what I did at that store, it wasn't just about protecting the people who were there that night. It prevented something much worse from happening. All those families who would have been at the Heritage Festival, all those children, they're safe because I acted on my instincts and used my training." "You're thinking about the job offers." Sarah nodded. "Not the ones I received exactly, but I've been thinking about how I can use what I know to help people in a way that fits with our life here." "What do you have in mind?" Sarah had been developing an idea for the past week, researching and making phone calls during the hours when Emma was at school. "What if I started teaching self-defense classes specifically for parents? Not just physical techniques, but situational awareness, threat assessment, basic emergency response. Things that could help ordinary people protect their families in extraordinary situations." Mike was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "You'd be making yourself public again. There would be more attention, more scrutiny." "Maybe, but it would be on my terms this time. And it would be about education and preparation, not about vigilantism or violence." "What does Emma think?" "I haven't talked to her about it yet, but yesterday she asked me if I was going to teach other moms how to be as brave as I am. When I asked her why she thought that, she said it would be good if all the moms in her class knew how to protect their kids the way I protected those people in the store." Mike smiled. "She's pretty wise for an 8-year-old. She's growing up fast, and part of what she's learning is that being strong and being kind aren't opposites. You can be both. You can be a warrior and a nurturer. You can be prepared for danger while still choosing peace." The next morning, Sarah made a phone call that would reshape her civilian career. She contacted Dr. Maria Santos, a psychologist who specialized in working with veterans and their families, and proposed a collaboration. "Dr. Santos, my name is Sarah Martinez. I'm a former Navy SEAL, and I'd like to talk to you about developing a community safety program that combines practical self-defense training with psychological preparation for emergency situations." Dr. Santos was immediately interested. "Mrs. Martinez, I saw the news stories about what happened at Murphy's Corner Store. I've been hoping someone with your background and perspective would want to get involved in community safety education. What I have in mind isn't about creating vigilantes or encouraging people to take the law into their own hands. It's about empowering ordinary citizens with the knowledge and confidence they need to protect themselves and others in crisis situations." "Tell me more." Sarah outlined her vision, a program that would teach basic situational awareness, simple self-defense techniques, emergency response protocols, and, most importantly, the psychological skills needed to remain calm and effective under pressure. It would be offered through community centers, schools, and neighborhood groups targeting parents, teachers, and other community members who might find themselves responsible for protecting others. "I want to call it Guardian Angels," Sarah said. "Not because we're trying to create heroes, but because we're trying to help people become the kind of everyday guardians their communities need." Dr. Santos was enthusiastic about the psychological component. So many people freeze in emergency situations because they've never been taught how to manage fear and stress. Combining practical skills with mental preparation could literally save lives. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Dr. Santos developed a curriculum that balanced physical training with psychological education. They reached out to local law enforcement for support and guidance, ensuring that their program would complement rather than conflict with official emergency response procedures. The first Guardian Angels workshop was held 6 weeks after the federal investigation concluded in the community center where Emma attended after-school programs. Sarah had expected maybe a dozen people to attend the introductory session. Instead, more than 40 parents, teachers, and community members showed up. Among the attendees was Frank Morrison, the Vietnam veteran who had been in the store the night of the robbery. He approached Sarah before the session began. Mrs. Martinez, I wanted to thank you again for what you did that night. But more than that, I wanted to thank you for what you're doing now. What do you mean, Mr. Morrison? You could have taken one of those high-paying security jobs and moved your family somewhere safer and more private. Instead, you're staying here and sharing what you know with the rest of us. That takes a different kind of courage. The workshop began with Sarah telling her story, not just what had happened at the store, but why she had decided to transition from military service to civilian life and how she had learned to balance her role as a protector with her role as a mother. I spent 8 years in combat zones, she told the group. I learned how to fight, how to lead, how to make split-second decisions under pressure. When I left the military, I thought I was leaving all of that behind. I thought being a good mother meant being peaceful, gentle, nurturing. It took me 3 years to realize that being a good mother sometimes means being willing to fight for the people you love. She walked the group through the basic principles of situational awareness, how to assess your environment, identify potential threats, and recognize when a situation is escalating beyond normal parameters. She demonstrated simple but effective self-defense techniques that didn't require years of training or exceptional physical strength. But the most powerful part of the workshop was when Dr. Santos talked about the psychology of emergency response. Most people think they know how they would react in a dangerous situation, Dr. Santos explained. But the reality is that extreme stress causes predictable changes in how our brains function. We lose fine motor control, our vision narrows, our hearing becomes selective. Understanding these changes and practicing simple responses can mean the difference between freezing up and taking effective action. After the formal presentation, the group broke into smaller sessions where participants could practice techniques and ask questions. Sarah found herself surrounded by people who had stories of their own, times when they had felt helpless in dangerous situations, times when they had wished they knew how to respond more effectively. Linda Patterson, the parent who had been concerned about weapons in Sarah's house, approached during the break. Sarah, I owe you an apology. After the news story came out, I was scared. I didn't understand what your military background meant, and I let fear make me suspicious of you. You don't need to apologize, Linda. It's natural to be concerned about things you don't understand. But that's just it, I do understand now. Watching you teach tonight, seeing how you combine strength with compassion, I realize that Emma is lucky to have a mother who can protect her and teach her to protect others. I'd like Madison to have those same skills. By the end of the evening, Sarah had commitments from community centers in 3 different neighborhoods to host Guardian Angels workshops. Parents were asking about advanced classes for teenagers. Teachers were inquiring about school-based programs that could help them respond to various emergency situations. As Sarah packed up her materials and prepared to leave, Emma appeared at her side. Mike had brought her to watch the last part of the workshop, and she had been sitting quietly in the back, observing everything with the intense focus that seemed to be her trademark. Mom, when I'm older, can I help you teach people how to be brave? Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level. Sweetheart, you already help people be brave just by being who you are. But, yes, when you're older, if you want to help teach these classes, I'd love to have you as my partner. What'd I teach them? You could teach them that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Emma considered this seriously. Like when you saw those bad guys in the store and you were scared, but you helped people anyway? Exactly like that. As they drove home that night, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her family to this point. 3 months ago, she had been trying to disappear into suburban anonymity, to become invisible as a former warrior. Tonight, she was teaching other parents how to access their own inner strength. The transformation had begun with 3 criminals who made the mistake of threatening innocent people in front of someone who had sworn an oath to protect others. But it had evolved into something larger, a recognition that the skills Sarah had developed in military service weren't something to be hidden or abandoned. They were gifts to be shared responsibly and purposefully. 6 months later, the Guardian Angels program had expanded to 12 communities across Colorado. Sarah had been invited to speak at law enforcement conferences, veterans organizations, and community safety summits. She had co-authored an article with Dr. Santos for a psychology journal about the effectiveness of combining physical and mental preparation in civilian safety training. More importantly, she had found a way to honor both sides of her identity. She was still the mother who made Emma breakfast every morning and cheered at every soccer game. But she was also the warrior who could teach others to protect themselves and their loved ones, who could help build stronger, safer communities through education and preparation. Emma, now 9, had become her mother's most enthusiastic supporter. She often helped set up equipment at workshops and had even given a short presentation to other children about the importance of telling trusted adults when they felt unsafe. Her confidence had grown along with her understanding of what her mother did, and she spoke with pride about having a mom who helped keep people safe. The incident at Murphy's Corner store had become a defining moment not just for Sarah, but for their entire community. The store itself had become an unofficial symbol of citizen preparedness. Marcus, the young store clerk who had witnessed Sarah's actions, had used the experience as motivation to join the police academy. The elderly veteran Frank Morrison had become a regular volunteer at Guardian Angel's workshops, sharing his own experiences with younger participants. Even Tommy Kellerman, the would-be robber whom Sarah had rendered unconscious, had sent a letter from prison. In it, he thanked her for stopping him before he became involved in something that would have destroyed many more lives. He was using his time in federal custody to get clean and develop skills that would help him build a legitimate life when he was released. One evening, as Sarah and Mike sat on their back porch watching Emma practice soccer moves in the backyard, Mike asked a question that had been on his mind for months. "Do you ever regret it? Stepping forward that night, instead of just calling for help?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "You know what I regret? I regret that it took 3 years after leaving the military for me to realize that my training and experience weren't something to be ashamed of or hidden. I spent so much time trying to be a normal suburban mom that I forgot I could be both normal and extraordinary at the same time." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the best version of myself isn't someone who pretends she never served in combat. It's someone who uses what she learned in combat to make civilian life better and safer for everyone." Mike nodded. "You know, Emma told her teacher that her mom is a superhero who doesn't wear a cape." Sarah laughed. "What did the teacher say?" "She said that the best superheroes are the ones who look like regular people, because they inspire other regular people to believe they can be heroes too." As if on cue, Emma came running over where they were sitting, grass stains on her knees, and a huge smile on her face. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you always say, that the best way to be brave is to practice being brave in small ways so you're ready for big ways." "That's right. What about it?" "Well, there's a new girl at school named Sophia, and some of the kids are being mean to her because she doesn't speak English very well yet. I was thinking maybe I could practice being brave by sitting with her at lunch and helping her feel welcome." Sarah felt her heart swell with pride. This was what she had hoped for. Not that Emma would become a fighter, but that she would become someone who stood up for people who needed protection. "I think that's the perfect way to practice being brave," Sarah said. "And if you need any help figuring out how to make Sophia feel welcome, your dad and I are here to help." As Emma ran back to continue practicing her soccer moves, Sarah realized that the story that began in Murphy's Corner store wasn't really about a former Navy SEAL who stopped a robbery. It was about a mother who learned that the best way to protect her daughter was to teach her how to protect others, and about a community that discovered that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they were properly prepared and motivated. The gun pressed to her head that night had been meant to intimidate and control. Instead, it had become the catalyst for a transformation that rippled out through her family, her community, and ultimately to thousands of people who learned that they didn't have to be helpless in the face of danger. Sarah Martinez was still a soccer mom. She still made Emma breakfast every morning, still cheered at every game, still helped with homework, and worried about typical parenting challenges. But she was also a guardian angel, someone who had learned to balance the warrior and the nurturer, someone who proved every day that you don't have to choose between being strong and being kind. And sometimes, late at night when she was sure Emma was asleep, Sarah would smile as she remembered the look in Tommy Kellerman's eyes when he realized he had made a very big mistake. Because that look had taught her something important. The most dangerous person in any room isn't necessarily the one who looks the most threatening. Sometimes it's the soccer mom who just wants to buy milk for her daughter's cereal. In the end, the three men who pressed that gun to her head had learned exactly what they set out to teach, that actions have consequences. They just hadn't expected the consequences to be their own education and why you should never underestimate someone based on appearances and why threatening innocent people in front of a Navy SEAL is never, ever a good idea. The story that began with violence had become a story about community, preparation, and the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when the situation demands it. And every time Sarah taught another Guardian Angels workshop, every time she helped another parent develop the confidence to protect their family, every time Emma stood up for someone who needed help, that story continued to grow and spread. Because the best stories don't end with the last page. They end when the lessons they teach become so deeply embedded in people's lives that they create new stories, better stories, stories where the good guys win not through luck or chance, but through preparation, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what's right. And in suburbs across America, there are now soccer moms and baseball dads and teachers and shop clerks who know that they have the power to be someone's guardian angel when the moment requires it. They know because Sarah Martinez taught them that heroes don't always wear uniforms, they don't always carry badges, and they don't always look the way movies and television suggest they should. Sometimes heroes look exactly like the person you see in the mirror every morning. Ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things because someone needs to, and because they prepared themselves to be ready when that moment comes.